Today we're going to be learning about solving percent problems. This shouldn't be new. I mean, you've done this in elementary school. You would have done this in grade 7 and grade 8, but we're going to review how to do this. So on your desk, you should have a calculator and you should have this note. And the first thing that we're going to write out on our note is our date, and today's date is October 25th. Oh, it's 26. I'm doing this on the 25th, 2016. So it says here, when we're solving percent problems, there's two ways we can look at these problems. The first way, so this is, again, I'm going to highlight this, when we know the whole. And when it's saying the whole, it's saying the total amount that we're talking about here. So when we know the whole, I'm going to give you some suggestions and some strategies on how to do these problems. So it says here, suppose a school has 720 students. 60% are required to participate in a school activity. What we want to try and find out is how many students have to participate in this school activity. We know 60% of them do, but that's not actually telling us how many students are participating in this. So we are going to solve this. There are a couple of ways to solve this, and you can see that when we solve it, it doesn't really matter which way you do. I'm going to make some recommendations when you do this. So our first step here is going to be solving by a fraction. Okay, so I don't see any fractions in this equation, so where do I get a fraction? Well, we know that anytime we're given a percent, 60%, I can write that as a fraction. It's comparing it to 100%. So 60 over 100 gives me what my fraction is. Now, I want to find 60% of 720 students. Anytime we're dealing with percentage here, we're going to multiply. So I'm going to write it like this, times 720. Okay, so how do we do this math here? Well, you may remember, and I know we haven't talked too much about fractions, but you can do it in this way. There's actually, any whole number can be written as a fraction. We can put it over 1. Another way I can write this is 60 times 720 divided by 100. Okay, my next step here when I do this, there's going to be a sequence in the calculator. I'm going to put what I want you to type inside your calculator. So all of you should have your calculators out. All of you, I want you to practice typing this in. You are going to put inside your calculator 60 times 720 divided by 100, and then you'll press your equal sign. You can put that all in the same line, and you should get an answer of 432. Do I need to see this step here? No, I'm just writing that out so you know what to type into your calculator. You can go right from this blue line right to 432. So what that's talking about is that there are 432 students that are going to participate in this school activity. So that's using a fraction. So I'm going to highlight that, using a fraction. And anytime we use the fraction, you'll follow the same steps. Multiply the top numbers and divide by 100. It will always be those steps. Solve using a decimal. Okay, we know how to do a decimal here. So again, you will have to remember 60% can be written as a fraction, and that is 60 over 100. We know that if we have a fraction, I can get that into a decimal by dividing. So again, I'm going to put what you should put in your calculator. You don't have to write this stuff out. Inside your calculator, you'll put 60 divided by 100, and then you'll hit your equal sign. And we should get here, 60 divided by 100 gives me 0.6. That is the decimal. And that's what I'm going to use. So when I'm using the decimal, my first step that I have to do is I have to get that into a decimal. I have to write 60% as a decimal. My step 2 is I'm going to multiply. I'm going to multiply the decimal, 0.6, by the total amount, and the total amount of students I have is 720. And shouldn't be a surprise to you, but we get the same answer, 432. So whatever method you like doing, you can use. I won't require you to solve by all 3 methods, but just so you know that that's what we can do. Now, another way we can solve is using a proportion. So again, I'm writing 60%. We know 60% can be written as 60 over 100. And I'm going to set that up with another fraction. Okay, so I need to define here what these numbers mean. If I go back up to my original problem here, what is the 60% talking about? 60% of the students are required to participate in the school. So that 60 is talking about the number of students who participate. The 100 here is representing the total number of students. That's what the percentage means. 60% participate out of all of the students. So when I'm setting up my proportion, we know that they gave me a number, excuse me, of 700. Suppose the school has 720 students. Well, that's 720 students. Is that talking about the number that participated, or is that talking about the total number of students? I hope all of you are thinking in your head that it says the total population of the school is 720, so that's the total number of students. So now I need to figure out what goes in that missing blank here. Well, I can find here, I'm not going to write it as a ratio, I'll keep it as a fraction. 100 going to 720 is increasing, so I know I'm going to have multiplication here. 100 times what gives me 720? Well, in case you're not sure of, we kind of do the opposite of this to figure out what number that is. We take 720, the number we want, and we divide it by 100, and that will give us that magic number. So I'll give you a minute to put 720 divided by 100 into your calculator. And you should get 7.2. So 100 times 7.2 gives me 720. Because I multiplied by 7.2 on the bottom, I have to multiply by 7.2 on the top. So when I multiply 60 times 7.2, look what I get again, 432 students. There's 3 different ways you could have solved this problem: using a fraction, using a decimal, and using proportions. You can choose which method you like to use and go with it. That's totally okay. So I have as an example here, now this is a pretty specific example. It says find 23% of $125. Okay, so when I want to find this, again, my first step here, I'm going to try, we'll practice solving this in a couple ways. So my first way, I'm going to find it by solving by a fraction. So I can write 23% as 23 over 100. Of $125 means I'm going to multiply by 125. How can I rewrite that? Well, I take 23 times 125 and I divide it by 100. I'll give you a moment to put that in.
Please excuse the interruption. At this time, we'd ask all grade 9 classes and their teachers to make their way to the small gym. We'd ask teachers to please sit with their classes. That's all grade 9 teachers and students to the gym, small gym at this time.
So that's not you. We'll continue to do our note. So again, when you do 23 times 125 divided by 100, we get 28.75. So that's saying that there are $28.75 or 75 cents is 23% of $125. Okay, another method that I can do using this is using my decimal method. So I can take 23 over 100 and I divide it. 23 divided by 100 gives me 0.23. In my next step here, I take 0.23 and I multiply it by 125, my total amount. What do I get when I do that? Again, it shouldn't be come as a shock. It's $28.75. Okay, the final way, and again, this may be a little bit more of a trickier way to do it, is I'm going to set up a proportion. So I write 23 over 100 is equal to, okay, so now I have to look at this. 23 over 100. 100 is talking about the total. Well, what is the total amount that we're given here is 125. So I'm going to put 125 at the bottom, and I need to figure out what goes in that blank. Well, again, I know I'm going from 100 to 125. I know that there's going to be multiplication involved because my number is increasing. So how do I figure out what number I multiply by? Off to the side here, I take 125 divided by 100. I'll give you a minute to put that into your calculator. And you should get 1.25. So 100 times 1.25 gives me 125. So I'm going to now multiply that on the top, 1.25. So when I do 23 times 1.25, shouldn't be as a surprise, what do we get? 28.75. 3 different ways to get the answer. All you have to do is show me one way. Okay, the second type of example that we're going to talk about is when we know a part. So here's an example of when we know a part. It says here 15% of students volunteer at a local soup kitchen. The number of student volunteers is 39. How many students are enrolled at the school? Okay, this one's a little bit different because we're not given the total amount. We're only given the 15% amount. So again, what I can do here, there's a couple of ways that we can figure this out. Our first way is using a decimal. When I want to use a decimal, I'm going to write 15 over 100. It's always over 100, and I can divide that and get my decimal. I'll give you a couple seconds to figure out what the decimal is. So I have 0.15. And then I'm going to, so I know here, this is what this equation is saying, is I would normally take 0.15 and multiply it by the total. So I'm just going to put a variable t there. If I put the variable t there, what I can do is that I put it as a hook so it doesn't look like an addition sign. So it's saying 15% or 0.15 times the total population is equal to 39. That's how I would figure it out. So to reverse it, what I can do, and you may remember this, and we're going to talk about this a little early on. I'm going to give you some different ways to do this. So you don't have to do it this way, is I can divide here by 0.15, and I can divide here by 0.15, and t is equal to, we get 260. So what happens when I divide by 0.5? 0.5 and 0.5 0.15, sorry, they cancel out. So I'm just left with t on my left-hand side, and 39 divided by 0.15 is 260. So it's saying 260 students attend at the school or are enrolled at the school. Using a proportion in this may be a little bit easier. You just have to set up your proportion correctly. I have to go 15 over 100. That's my ratio. And again here, if I were to define each one of these pieces, 15% is talking about the number of volunteers. And the 100 is talking about the total population. So when I set up my proportion, I'm going to go back up here and look at what information do they give me. Well, they give me 39, and 39 is the number of student volunteers. So when I look at my ratio here, volunteers go on the top, so I'm going to put 39 on the top. And now I'm actually solving for my bottom piece. Okay, now it's the same step here. I have to go from 15 to 39. I know I'm increasing, so I know I'm going to be using multiplication. I'm not sure what I have to multiply 15 by to get 39. So again, off to the side here, I'll take 39 divided by 15, and that gives me 2.6. So I'm going to take 15 and times it by 2.6. And if you put that in your calculator, you can see when you do 15 times 2.6, we get 39. So because I multiplied by 2.6 on the top, I need to multiply by 2.6 on the bottom. So when I take 100 and I times it by 2.6, I get 260. And look at that, I get the same answer. Two ways I can do the exact same problem. You get to pick which method you would like to use. Okay, the next question here, if we read it, it says 80% of Holy Cross students walked the pilgrimage last year. If there were 900 students, how many of them walked? Out of the students walking, 40% were boys. How many students were boys? Okay, so my first step here, I want to figure out how many boys there are. And it says 40 out of the students walking, 40% were boys. Well, do I know how many students walked? No, I don't know how many students walked. I know last year that 80% of the students at Holy Cross walked. If there were 900 students, how many of them walked? So this kind of separated the question into steps here. So I'm going to figure out how many of them walked. So I'm going to take this 80 over 100, because 80% we can write as 80 over 100, and I'm going to change that into a decimal. And we get here, when we do 80 divided by 100, 0.8. Now, my next step is I multiply by 900, the total amount, which gives me 720. So out of 900 students, 720 students participated in the pilgrimage last year. Now it says, out of the students walking, 40% were boys. Well, I'm going to take the 40% and change it into a decimal, which gives me 0.4. Now I want you to think to yourself, what am I going to multiply that 0.4 by? Okay, so there's two options. We can use this number here, or we can use this number here. What do each of those numbers mean? It says 900 students, if there were 900 students. So that's talking about the total population. Well, the question says, out of the students walking, 40% were boys. Well, that 900 really isn't applicable there because the 900 is talking about the total population instead of the students walking. The 720 is the number we figured out to figure out how many of them are walking. So I take 0.4 and I multiply that by 720. Remember, brackets mean multiplication. That means the exact same thing. And I have here that there were actually 288 students who walked the pilgrimage last year. Okay, so now that we've gone through that note, you are going to get, there's 3 worksheets that you need to complete in your seat work. Please make sure that you refer to your notes when you are doing this, and you are either going to be solving for when you know a part, or you're going to solve when you know the whole. You need to understand the difference. And if you need any help, hopefully Kristen can help you, and that will be it. So all of that work, that will be due tomorrow.